Every morning, Celia slipped a plate of warm pancakes to the quiet, bruised 6-year-old sitting alone in booth 3. She thought she was saving a neglected child. She had no idea the little girl belonged to Boston's most ruthless crime syndicate, until 4 armed men sealed the diner doors. The smell of stale grease, bleach, and burnt Robusta coffee was permanently embedded in Celia Grant's uniform. Working the opening shift at Carmichael's Diner in Boston's South End wasn't glamorous, but it kept the lights on in her cramped apartment and slowly chipped away at the crushing medical debt her late mother had left behind. At 24, Celia's life was a predictable loop of taking orders, dodging the wandering hands of late-night drunkards, and scrubbing griddles, until the second week of November, when the loop broke. It started on a freezing Tuesday morning. The diner bell chimed at exactly 6:15 a.m., cutting through the low hum of the refrigerators. Celia looked up from wiping the counter to see an older woman, reeking of cheap gin and stale cigarettes, shove a little girl through the front door. The woman, who Celia later learned was named Brenda, didn't even take off her scarf. "Sit there. Don't move. Don't ask for anything," Brenda snapped, pointing a trembling acrylic-nailed finger at the furthest corner table, booth 3. Without another word, Brenda turned around, walked back out into the freezing sleet, and locked herself inside a rusted Chevrolet parked across the street to sleep. Celia watched, her rag pausing on the Formica counter. The little girl couldn't have been older than 6. She was swallowed whole by an oversized, bright yellow winter coat that looked like it had been bought at a thrift store 3 sizes too big. She carried a faded red backpack, clutching its straps with tiny, pale hands. The child scrambled into the vinyl booth, her feet dangling inches above the checkerboard floor, and stared blankly at the salt and pepper shakers. Celia poured a glass of ice water and walked over. "Hey there, sweetie," she said softly, keeping her voice light. "Where's your mum?" The girl didn't look up. Her wide, pale blue eyes remained fixed on the table. "Aunt Brenda says I'm not allowed to talk to strangers." "Well, I'm Celia," she smiled, tapping her plastic name tag. "Now we aren't strangers. Can I get you something to eat? You must be freezing." The girl shook her head slightly, her gaze darting nervously toward the window where the rusted Chevy sat. "No, thank you. I'm just supposed to wait until the school bus comes." Celia's heart sank. She recognized the hollow look in the girl's eyes, the unmistakable shadow of a child who was used to being invisible. Celia retreated to the kitchen. Her boss, Arthur Carmichael, a balding man with a permanent scowl and a mountain of gambling debts, barked at her to mind her own business. "That woman outside is bad news, Celia. Her family associates with the wrong crowd in the North End. You don't want that kind of trouble." But Celia couldn't ignore the rumbling she had heard from the little girl's stomach. Defying Arthur, she whipped up a small batch of blueberry pancakes, topped them with a ridiculous amount of whipped cream, and carried them out with a mug of hot chocolate. When she slid the plate onto the table, the little girl's eyes went wide. "On the house," Celia whispered with a wink. "Our secret." It took a moment, but the hunger won out. The girl devoured the food with a desperate speed that made Celia's chest ache. When she finished, she looked up, a dab of whipped cream on her nose. "I'm Lily," she whispered. From that day on, it became a ritual. Every morning at 6:15 a.m., Brenda would dump Lily at the diner. Every morning, Celia would slide a plate of fresh food, sometimes scrambled eggs, sometimes waffles, onto booth 3. They developed a quiet bond. Lily began bringing her crayons, drawing elaborate pictures while she ate. But Celia noticed something disturbing in the drawings. Lily never drew a family. She drew tall, dark buildings, men in black suits, and a large, shadowy figure she simply called Papa, who she said was far, far away, making the monsters go to sleep. The real turning point happened on a Thursday, 3 weeks into their routine. Lily reached across the table to grab a pink crayon, and her oversized yellow sleeve slid back. Celia's breath hitched. Wrapped around the child's tiny, fragile wrist was a dark, purplish-black bruise, the distinct shape of an adult's fingers. "Lily," Celia asked, her voice trembling as she carefully touched the edge of the girl's sleeve, "where did you get that?" Lily yanked her arm back, her eyes filling with instant tears of panic. "I tripped," she lied quickly, her voice cracking. "I fell down the stairs. Aunt Brenda was just trying to catch me." Celia knew a grab mark when she saw one. Her blood boiled. She looked out the window at the Chevy. Brenda was smoking a cigarette, completely oblivious to the child inside. Celia marched back to the employee locker room, pulled out her phone, and searched for the number for Massachusetts Child Protective Services. She printed out the necessary reporting forms in the manager's office. She decided she would fill them out that night and hand-deliver them the next morning. She couldn't let Lily go back to that house. But the universe and the criminal underworld had a completely different timeline. The following Tuesday morning brought a torrential downpour to Boston. The rain hammered against the diner's large glass windows, blurring the streetlights into streaks of yellow and red. Celia wiped down the counter at 6:10 a.m., her stomach in knots. The CPS forms were folded neatly in her apron pocket. She was ready. But at 6:15 a.m., Brenda's rusted Chevy didn't pull up. Instead, a convoy of 3 black, armored Lincoln Navigators rolled to a smooth, menacing halt directly in front of Carmichael's diner, blocking the entire lane of traffic. Arthur, who had been tallying receipts behind the register, froze. The color instantly drained from his face. "Oh, God," he whispered, dropping his pen. "Celia, get in the back. Now." "What? Why?" Celia asked, staring through the rain-streaked glass. Before Arthur could answer, the doors of the SUVs opened simultaneously. 4 massive men stepped out into the freezing rain. They didn't bother with umbrellas. They wore bespoke, dark Italian suits that clung to their broad shoulders, their coats left unbuttoned, just enough to reveal the unmistakable, heavy bulges of shoulder holsters. They moved with a synchronized, predatory grace. The diner bell didn't just chime, it violently banged against the glass as the front door was shoved open. The 4 bodyguards stepped inside, their polished dress shoes completely silent on the linoleum. One man, built like a freight train with a jagged scar across his neck, casually flipped the open sign to "closed" and locked the heavy brass deadbolt. Another man stepped to the back hallway, blocking the exit to the alley. The 2 remaining morning regulars, a pair of construction workers, took one look at the men, left a $20 bill on their untouched coffees, and scrambled out the side emergency door without a word. Then, the final man walked in. He didn't look like a bodyguard. He looked like the king of a very dark, very violent world. Dwayne Foster was 34, with sharp, aristocratic features carved from marble, midnight dark hair slicked back from the rain, and eyes so intensely cold they seemed to drop the temperature of the room. He wore a charcoal wool overcoat that dripped water onto the floor. There was a terrifying stillness to him. He didn't draw a weapon, but the sheer gravity of his presence made it hard for Celia to breathe. Dwayne slowly scanned the diner. His gaze swept over the terrified Arthur, dismissed him as irrelevant, and then dragged across the empty booths until it landed on booth 3. Lily was already there. She had slipped in through the back door earlier to avoid the rain, clutching her yellow backpack. At the sight of the towering men, the little girl shrank back against the vinyl seat, her eyes wide with terror, pulling her knees to her chest. Dwayne took a heavy step toward the booth. Celia didn't think. The adrenaline hit her bloodstream like a freight train. The protective instinct she had cultivated over the past month overrode every basic survival mechanism in her brain. She grabbed the heaviest thing near her, a full, scalding hot glass coffee pot, and vaulted over the counter flap. She planted herself squarely between the terrifying Mafia boss and the 6-year-old girl. "Take one more step toward her, and I will melt the skin off your face," Celia snarled, lifting the steaming pot of dark roast, her hand shaking so violently the glass rattled against the handle. The entire diner plunged into a deathly silence. The 4 bodyguards instantly reached inside their jackets, the metallic snick of safeties being disengaged, echoing off the walls. Dwayne held up a single gloved hand. The bodyguards froze. He looked down at Celia. His cold, calculating eyes analyzed her. The stained apron, the defiance in her posture, the desperate grip on the coffee pot. For a fleeting second, a flicker of genuine shock crossed his stoic face. No one had spoken to Dwayne Foster like that in a decade. No one had dared stand in his way. "You are threatening me," Dwayne said. His voice was a rich, low baritone, laced with a faint, dangerous Italian accent. It was smoother than silk, and twice as deadly. "With Arabica roast." "I don't care who you are," Celia breathed, her heart hammering against her ribs. "You are not touching this little girl. I've already called the police. I've called CPS." Dwayne's eyes darkened at the mention of CPS. "Put the coffee pot down, ragazza. You are standing between me and my blood." Celia blinked, confused. "What?" Behind Celia, a tiny, trembling voice broke the tension. "Papa!" Celia whipped her head around. Lily was standing up on the booth seat. The girl wasn't looking at Dwayne with terror anymore. She was looking at him with desperate disbelief. Dwayne ignored Celia completely. He dropped to his knees right there in the middle of the greasy, unmopped floor, ignoring the dirt on his $5,000 trousers. He opened his arms. Lily scrambled over the table, bypassing Celia entirely, and threw herself into the man's chest. Dwayne wrapped his massive arms around the tiny girl in the yellow coat, burying his face in her hair. The ruthless mob boss closed his eyes, exhaling a breath that sounded like a fractured sob. "Mia piccola luz," he whispered fiercely. "My little light." Celia stood frozen, the coffee pot still suspended in mid-air. This was the papa from Lily's drawings, the man making the monsters go to sleep. Dwayne pulled back slightly to inspect his daughter's face. As he did, he gripped her arm. Lily flinched. Dwayne's eyes instantly dropped to her wrist. He pushed up the oversized yellow sleeve, exposing the dark, ugly bruise left by Brenda. The shift in the room was instantaneous and terrifying. The tender father vanished. The devil returned. Dwayne's eyes went pitch black. He looked up at his second-in-command, the scarred man by the door. "Matteo." "Already on it, boss," Matteo said, pulling out a burner phone. "Brenda won't make it out of the city." Dwayne stood up, lifting Lily effortlessly into his arms. He finally turned his full attention back to Celia. He noticed the empty plate of pancakes on the table, the crayons, and the warmth radiating from the corner booth. He pieced it together instantly. "I was told she was being cared for in a private estate in Brookline while I handled a dispute in Milan," Dwayne said, his voice eerily calm. "I sent $50,000 a month to my ex-wife's sister to ensure my daughter was fed, educated, and hidden from my rivals. Instead, I returned to find out Brenda has been dumping her in a diner to gamble away my money, leaving my daughter bruised and starving." He took a step closer to Celia. "And yet, she is fed. She is warm." He looked at the coffee pot Celia was still clutching. "And you were willing to die to protect a child that wasn't yours." "She was hungry," Celia said defensively, finally lowering the pot. "Someone had to act like a parent." It was a bold, stupid thing to say to a Mafia boss. But Dwayne didn't flinch. Instead, he reached into his coat. Arthur, still cowering behind the register, let out a squeak of terror. But Dwayne simply pulled out a massive, banded stack of $100 bills and tossed it onto the counter. It hit the wood with a heavy thud. "The diner is closed indefinitely," Dwayne announced to Arthur without looking at him. Then he looked dead into Celia's eyes. "Brenda sold my location to the Moretti family to clear her gambling debts. They know about this diner. They know where my daughter has been spending her mornings. In exactly 20 minutes, Silas Moretti's men are going to burn this place to the ground." Celia's blood ran cold. "What? If you stay here, you are dead," Dwayne stating it as a simple, unchangeable fact. He adjusted Lily on his hip. Lily reached out, her small hand grabbing the fabric of Celia's apron. "Come with us, Celia," Lily pleaded, her voice thick with tears. "Please." Dwayne turned toward the door, his bodyguards forming a tight wedge around him. He paused, looking over his shoulder at the stunned waitress. "You have 5 seconds to grab your coat, waitress," Dwayne commanded, the absolute authority in his voice, leaving no room for argument. "You protected what is mine. Now, I protect you." The armored Lincoln Navigator tore through the rain-slicked streets of Boston, leaving Carmichael's diner far behind in the rearview mirror. Celia sat in the back, her cheap, grease-stained uniform starkly contrasting with the plush, hand-stitched leather interior. Beside her, Lily was curled into a tiny ball, fast asleep, her head resting on Celia's thigh. In the front passenger seat, Dwayne Foster was a statue of coiled violence. He was on a satellite phone, speaking in rapid, hushed Italian. Celia couldn't understand the words, but she understood the tone. It was the sound of a man orchestrating a war. He mentioned the name Silas Moretti several times, each syllable dripping with venom. He also dropped the name Constellis, a real-world private military contractor, ordering Matteo to pull 2 squads of their former operatives to lock down the city limits. This wasn't just a gang dispute. This was a tactical military operation. They drove for 40 minutes, winding deep into the affluent, heavily wooded suburbs of Weston. The Navigator slowed as it approached a massive pair of wrought-iron gates set into a 12-foot-high stone wall. Cameras tracked their movement. The gates swung open silently, revealing a sprawling, modern compound hidden within acres of dense pine trees. "Welcome to the estate, Miss Grant," Matteo said gruffly from the driver's seat, glancing at her through the rearview mirror. Celia barely had time to process the sheer scale of Dwayne's wealth before they were pulling into a subterranean garage filled with exotic cars. Dwayne stepped out, opening the back door himself. He reached in to take Lily, but the girl whined softly in her sleep, her small hands tightly gripping Celia's apron strings. For a moment, the ruthless Mafia boss hesitated. He looked at the waitress, his dark eyes analyzing the way she gently stroked his daughter's hair. "Leave her," Dwayne commanded softly. "Carry her inside. I will show you to your quarters." Celia carefully scooped the sleeping child into her arms, marveling at how light she was. She followed Dwayne through a maze of sterile, highly secured corridors until they reached an elevator that opened into the main house. The interior was breathtaking. Cathedral ceilings, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking a rain-swept forest, and minimalist, ultra-expensive furniture. Yet, it felt entirely devoid of warmth. It was a fortress masquerading as a home. Dwayne led her to a massive suite in the east wing. "Lay her on the bed," he instructed. Celia gently placed Lily on the silk sheets, pulling a heavy down comforter over her. When she turned around, Dwayne was standing in the doorway, watching her with an intensity that made her skin prickle. He had removed his wet overcoat, revealing the immaculate tailoring of his suit and the dark leather of his shoulder holster. "My men went back to your apartment to retrieve your belongings," Duane stated, his voice devoid of emotion. "They found your landlord changing the locks. It seems your medical debts have caught up with you." Celia flushed, a wave of humiliated anger washing over her. "That is none of your business. I'll handle my own finances." Duane took a slow step into the room. The sheer physical presence of the man was overwhelming. "It became my business the second you stood between my daughter and a loaded weapon. Your debts. The $84,000 owed to Massachusetts General Hospital for your mother's oncology treatments have been paid in full." Celia stared at him, the air leaving her lungs. You paid it? Why?" "I do not owe debts, Celia," Duane said softly, stepping closer until she had to crane her neck to look up at him. "And I reward loyalty. You protected my blood. You fed her when the woman I paid to do so chose to gamble my money away. You belong to the foster syndicate now. You are under my protection." "I am not a piece of property," Celia fired back, her chin lifting defiantly despite the trembling in her knees. "I'm a waitress. I don't belong to the Mafia." A slow, dangerous smirk touched the corner of Duane's lips. It was the first time she had seen anything resembling a smile on his face, and it was entirely predatory. "You were a waitress. Now, you are the only person on this earth, besides myself, that my daughter trusts. You will stay here. You will be compensated handsomely. And you will never have to scrub a griddle for a man like Arthur Carmichael again." Before Celia could argue, a sharp knock echoed down the hall. Matteo appeared in the doorway, his face grim. "Boss, we have a problem. The Moretti family didn't just burn down the diner. They hit our warehouse on Route 1. Silas is demanding a parley. He knows we have Brenda." Duane's eyes instantly iced over. The brief moment of humanity vanished, replaced by the calculating monster who ruled the Boston underworld. "Lock down the estate," he ordered Matteo. He turned back to Celia, his gaze unyielding. "Do not leave this wing. If you hear gunfire, take Lily into the panic room behind the master closet and do not open the door for anyone but me." "What are you going to do?" Celia asked, her heart hammering against her ribs. "I am going to remind Silas Moretti why he should fear the dark," Duane replied quietly. For 3 agonizing days, Celia lived in a gilded cage. The estate was locked down tight. Heavily armed guards patrolled the manicured lawns. Inside, however, Celia focused entirely on Lily. She coaxed the little girl out of her shell, baking cookies in the massive industrial-grade kitchen, painting with watercolors in the sunroom, and slowly erasing the terrified, hollow look from the child's eyes. Duane was a ghost, appearing only late at night. Celia would sometimes find him standing in the doorway of Lily's room, watching them sleep, the exhaustion of a syndicate war etched into the harsh lines of his face. He was a man fighting on all fronts to maintain his empire. But in those quiet, shadowed moments, Celia saw the agonizing vulnerability of a father, desperate to keep his child safe. The climax came on the 4th night. A violent storm had rolled into Weston, the thunder masking the sound of the perimeter alarms being bypassed. Celia was reading a bedtime story to Lily in the main living room when the lights suddenly cut out. The heavy, automated storm shutters immediately slammed down over the floor-to-ceiling windows, plunging the room into darkness, lit only by the flickering embers of the fireplace. Then came the sound of shattered glass from the west wing, followed by the deafening crack of automatic gunfire. Celia didn't scream. Her street-smart survival instincts kicked in. She scooped Lily up, clamping a hand over the girl's mouth to muffle her terrified whimper. "Shh, sweetheart. We're playing hide and seek. Remember the rules." Lily nodded furiously, tears streaming down her face. Celia sprinted toward the east wing, but the sound of heavy boots echoed down the hallway. They were cut off. The panic room was too far. Desperate, Celia dragged Lily into Dwayne's private study, locking the heavy mahogany door. She shoved the girl into the hollow space beneath Dwayne's massive oak desk. "Stay here. Do not make a sound," Celia whispered, kissing the girl's forehead. She turned around, searching for a weapon. She grabbed a heavy, antique bronze letter opener off the desk, just as the door handle rattled. A second later, a shotgun blast blew the locking mechanism completely out of the wood. The door kicked open. 2 men wearing tactical gear and night vision goggles stepped into the room. They weren't Dwayne's men. "Search the room. Silas wants the kid alive, but he didn't say anything about the nanny," one of the men growled, sweeping his flashlight across the shadows. Celia didn't wait to be found. As the first man stepped past the heavy curtains, she lunged from the darkness, driving the bronze letter opener deep into the gap between his tactical vest and his shoulder. The man roared in pain, dropping his weapon. Celia grabbed the heavy metal lamp from the side table and swung it with all her might, cracking the second man across the jaw. She fought with the ferocity of a cornered lioness, driven entirely by the need to protect the child under the desk. But she was outmatched. The second man recovered, backhanding her across the face. Celia hit the floor hard, her vision swimming, tasting copper in her mouth. The man raised his weapon, pointing it directly at her chest. "Stupid bitch!" A voice, colder than the frozen Atlantic, cut through the study. "Look behind you." The intruder barely had time to turn his head. Dwayne stood in the doorway, his white dress shirt soaked in blood that wasn't his, a suppressed pistol in his hand. He didn't blink. He didn't hesitate. He pulled the trigger twice. Both intruders hit the floor, dead before they realized what happened. Dwayne ignored the bodies. He dropped his weapon and rushed to Celia, falling to his knees beside her. For the first time, the untouchable Mafia king looked genuinely terrified. He pulled her into his arms, his gloved hands gently framing her bruised face. "Celia." "Dio mio, Celia, look at me," he commanded, his voice shaking. Celia blinked, coughing as she tried to sit up. "Lily, under the desk." Lily scrambled out from beneath the oak wood and threw herself into Dwayne's side, sobbing. Dwayne wrapped one arm around his daughter and the other tightly around Celia, burying his face in Celia's neck. He pulled them both against his chest, holding them as if they were the only things keeping him anchored to the earth. "It's over," Dwayne whispered fiercely, his breath hot against her skin. "Silas Moretti is dead. His lieutenants are dead. The war is over." He pulled back slightly, looking down at Celia. The absolute reverence in his dark eyes made her breath catch. He saw the bruise forming on her cheek, a mirror to the one his daughter had worn days ago. But he also saw the unyielding fire in her eyes. "You fought for her again," Dwayne said, his voice dropping to a gravelly whisper. "You bled for my family." "I told you," Celia said, wincing as she wiped the blood from her lip. "I don't scare easily." Dwayne reached out, his thumb gently swiping away a tear from her cheek. In that moment, the hierarchy of their world completely shifted. She wasn't a waitress anymore. She wasn't an employee or a debt he had paid off. She had earned her place at the top of the syndicate, not through bloodlines or violence, but through unbreakable loyalty and fierce love. "You are no longer under my protection, Celia," Dwayne declared softly, his gaze dropping to her lips. "You are my equal. You are the heart of this family now, and I will burn down the rest of the world to ensure you never have to fight alone again." Celia looked at the ruthless king of Boston, then down at the little girl clinging to them both. For the first time in her life, she didn't feel the need to run. She leaned into Dwayne's touch, accepting the crown, the danger, and the man who came with it. Thank you for listening to this intense Mafia romance story. If you loved the drama, the twists, and Celia's fearless journey from a humble waitress to the powerful queen of the Foster Syndicate, please smash that like button. Don't forget to share this video with your fellow story lovers and subscribe to the channel for more thrilling, dramatic narratives coming your way very soon. Drop a comment below with your favorite scene.